Our first reading for this Sunday comes from the first book of Kings. We would like to reflect on the love, the compassion, and the divine authority of God that gives us life. Life comes to us from God, definitely, but from God's love and compassion and the power of His authority as God. Now, in the first reading, we find the figure of the great prophet Elijah, who was welcomed to the house of a widow, who at that time was living with her only son, her only boy. And this act of kindness on the part of the widow extended towards Elijah produced a lot of miracles, not only for Elijah, but also for mother and son. But in this Sunday's episode, we see how the son of this generous and hospitable widow died. And this event led the widow to question Elijah, the man of God, this known prophet. Said, "Why did you come here? How come your presence among us brought death to my son? Did you come to me in order to bring punishment to my sin and guilt? Are you the bearer of death because we are sinners?" This must have moved Elijah. Is this what the man of God is supposed to bring? Death, punishment for the guilty? So Elijah prayed to God that the life breath, reminiscent of Genesis, that the life breath coming from God may be restored to this boy. And Elijah did something. 3 times he approached the boy, stretched himself on the lifeless body of the boy, so that the warmth of a live body could resuscitate the dead body of the boy. But the power of God worked. God heard the prayer of Elijah and restored the life breath of the boy. And this brought this widow to a new realization. The prophet Elijah was sent by God not as a bearer of death and punishment, but as the bearer of life. The compassion of God through the prayer of Elijah and the divine authority at work through Elijah restored this boy back to life and back to his mother. Life owed to compassion. Life owed to the divine authority and divine power. My dear brothers and sisters, let us value our lives. Life is ours as a gift of God, out of His love and compassion. And it is not just a biological reality. Life is a fruit of divine authority. Our second reading for this Sunday comes from the letter of Paul to the Galatians. We have been reflecting on life as a gift of God, a gift of the power, compassion, and the love of God. The combination of love and power of God. This brings forth life. And in the first reading, we see how through the prayer of Elijah the prophet and through the compassion and power of God, the son of a widow was restored to life. Now, in the second reading, we find another dimension of the restoration to life. And this is not just a return to biological or natural life, as was experienced by the son of the widow in the first reading. Life also has a quality. Life has a purpose. Life is life because of its meaning, because of its purpose. So even if we may be physically healthy, we need to be restored to life in terms of purpose, direction, and meaning. And this was the experience of St. Paul. He talked about his former way of life in Judaism. And what was this former way of life in Judaism? It was not bad at all. It was filled with zeal for the Word of God. It was filled with zeal to preserve the traditions of his ancestors in the faith. However, this zeal led Paul to a certain type of rigidity and blindness. Out of his zeal for his Judaic faith, he desired to persecute the Church of Christ. And in fact, he participated in the death, the killing of some Christians. That was his way of life. Out of zeal for God, he was willing to kill. Out of zeal for his traditions, he was willing to persecute. But God, according to St. Paul, by his favor, by his love, by the power of his gentle compassion, St. Paul was called by God. Again, not out of any merit on his part, but simply out of the love, the gracious love of God. And new life was given to St. Paul, a new direction. He is now the apostle of Jesus' gospel, because Jesus himself had revealed himself to St. Paul. St. Paul experienced love and divine power in the revelation of Jesus, and that changed his life. That brought him to a new direction. It was clarified for him that he would be the apostle to the Gentiles. Again, new life coming from the gracious God, from his love and compassion, and also from the power of his word, the power and the authority of his gospel. My dear brothers and sisters, so in the second reading, we are being asked, how is your life? Not in terms of your physical health, but how is your direction in life? And if you desire to be reborn in your meaningfulness and purpose in life, then rely on the compassion of God and the power of his gospel, and you will be restored to life. Our gospel passage for this Sunday comes from St. Luke. We have been reflecting on the gift of life, definitely coming from God, but this comes from the love and the power of God. Look at that blending, the gentleness of God's love and compassion, and the power emanating from his divine authority. When these come together, then there is life. There is new life. This was the experience of the widow whose son died in the first reading, and Elijah prayed to God, and God had compassion on the widow. And through the power of God's love, compassion, and of course, divine authority, the boy was restored to life. And so Elijah was rediscovered by the widow as a man of God who came to them not to bring punishment for sin, but new life out of the compassion of God. In the second reading from the letter of Paul to the Galatians, Paul narrates how in his previous life, filled with zeal for the Judaic tradition, he reached the point of persecuting the early followers of Jesus Christ. But through the graciousness of God and the power of the revelation of Jesus to him and his gospel, then his life was given a new direction. And he discovered his real purpose in life, which is to be a believer of Jesus Christ and to be the apostle of the gospel of Christ. So it is not just a restoration of physical health, physical life, but even a discovery of the direction of our lives that happens when the compassion of the Lord works in us and the power of His Word hits us and becomes operative in our lives. This combination of compassion and power is very much present in the gospel. Jesus, with his disciples and with a big crowd accompanying him, entered the town of Naim. Imagine Jesus with a following. And as they entered the gate of the town, they encountered another crowd. And this crowd was bearing the dead body of the only son of a widow. You have the encounter of the Son of God and the dead son of a widow at the gate of the town. What will happen? Here is a new Elijah, not only a man of God, but the very Son of God. What will happen to him? Jesus, seeing the funeral procession and realizing that this was the only son of a widowed mother, was moved with compassion. So here the first element that we have been talking about, the compassion of God. God is able to feel with and for human beings who are suffering. And in this gospel passage, we see God in Jesus showing much love and compassion for a woman, and in her for all women who bear a lot of the sufferings and pains, not only in the family, but also many atrocities of society and history. God is moved in Jesus Christ with compassion. And this compassion led Jesus to act. He touched the litter. Wow. Now, if you are a zealous defender of Judaic tradition, like St. Paul in the second reading, you would have said, oh, Jesus is now impure, for he had touched something that is associated with the dead. But will Jesus become impure? Will he be contaminated by the sting of death that he has just touched? Let us see. Unlike Elijah who prayed to God so that the life breath of the boy would be restored, Jesus in this episode did not pray. He, by the power of his words, restored this boy to life. He just said, "Young man, I bid you get up." The power of Jesus, the power of his word, and the boy was restored to life and restored to his mother. The compassionate heart of God and the power of his word. You see, life-giving. This was experienced by the woman who lost her son during the time of Elijah. This was experienced by St. Paul in his reformation of life. And this was very much present in the experience of the widow of Nain. We are looking for life in our family. We're looking for life in society. Maybe we need these two components. Life will arise only when there is pure love and compassion. Without love and compassion, there will be no real life in society. But we also need power. What power? Not brute power, not brute political military power, not the power of money, not the power of ambition. We need divine power. The power of the Word of God, the power of the presence of God. Power and compassion coming from God. These two will bring us back to life. So let us examine ourselves. Let us examine what's going on in our families and societies. Maybe it is time for us, like Elijah, to pray to God, to have pity on us, and also to exercise the power of His Word on our lives and on our society.